Good morning and welcome to our webinar on safeguarding your applications and data. My name is Jenny Tomlinson and I am the Marketing Manager here at m-hance, and I will be acting as a moderator for today's presentation. I'm joined by my colleague Joe Dealey, who is m-hance's Technical Services Manager. Before I hand over to Joe, just to go through a few simple housekeeping items. We expect the webinar to last approximately 30 minutes. Please note the webinar is being recorded and will be available to view on demand. All participants are set to listen-only mode and will remain so for the duration of the webinar. If you have a question, click the question button on the right-hand side of your screen. In the new pane that opens, type your question in the top box and click Ask. Do feel free to submit your questions at any point during the webinar. We will answer them offline afterwards. With that, I'd like to hand you over to our presenter. Joe, over to you.
Thank you, Jenny. Good morning. As Jenny mentioned there, I'm Technical Services Manager for m-hance, but I'm also a Cloud Services Product Manager. Hopefully you'll find today's webinar useful. So, safeguard your applications and data. So, business continuity and disaster recovery. In relation to safeguarding your applications and data, this is a critical element. So when we talk about business continuity and disaster recovery, what are we really talking about? So the business continuity is the plan of action to ensure regular business will continue even during a disaster. It ensures continuity of operations with minimal service outage or downtime. Disaster recovery is a subset of the business continuity planning. A disaster recovery plan will typically contain the steps to restore data and critical applications in the event of a disaster. And data protection is integral to business continuity disaster recovery. You must have data integrity to have a successful disaster recovery plan. Business continuity and data protection are critical for every organization, regardless of industry. So let's just look at some common challenges that exist. So for data protection, business continuity, it's a set of common objectives that organizations tend to focus on, or challenges. One, minimizing downtime. Downtime costs organization money, so naturally enough we want to really try to minimize that. Reducing cost. Selling, increasing revenue is only part of the equation. Enterprises are always looking for ways to reduce costs and unnecessary overhead. Managing complexity. IT environments can be really complex with multiple data centers, different hardware vendors, and different DR solutions. Ensuring compliance. Businesses need to adhere to complex and sometimes confusing compliance mandates from many different regulatory bodies based on a number of factors, or they risk costly litigation and negative effects to their brand and bottom line. And finally, we have scaling protection. It's a given that organizations need protection when the unthinkable happens. But more than that, they need holistic defense solutions that can continue to protect them as they grow. In short, they need scalable, complete protection from human and natural disaster. So let's look at some Azure services that can help protect your applications and data. While data backup and DR might seem like the obvious solution, hosting your line of business application in Azure can play a big part in protecting your applications and data. So let's look at hosting your applications in Azure first. So what about the benefits of hosting your application in Azure? First, you have the security. Cybercrime and data breaches threaten businesses of all sizes, so you need the best security you can access. Microsoft provide multiple layers of security in Azure, which help reduce the risks from hacking and other malicious behaviors. Resilience. Microsoft data centers have ISO 22301 certification, So Azure is certified under the first international standard to demonstrate the ability to prevent, mitigate, respond to, and recover from disruptive incidents. Hosting in Azure also has native solutions for high availability and disaster recovery, such as availability sets protect against failures within an Azure data center, or availability zones protect against a complete data center failure. And we look at compliance, all the certifications that Microsoft have for the data centers, including ISO 27001. So they should satisfy any compliance requirements an organization may have. And finally, cost. With no outlay for hardware, enterprise technology is available to customers which may have been cost prohibitive previously. So data backup. You can have that test button there. It's just to highlight the importance of testing backups. I just tend to mention this on a regular basis because we still come across customers that only realize they have a problem with their backups when they need to do a restore. So, I can't emphasize that enough. So just some basics on any backup solution, and I'm sure many of you will be thinking that I'm stating the obvious, but I'll mention them anyway, as we still come across cases, as I mentioned, where customers are only aware that they don't have a valid backup when they actually need it. So critical have both on-site and off-site copies, and always have several copies. Protect against ransomware. I see sometimes where people are replicating their system off-site, but if the live system is attacked for ransomware or corruption, you're replicating that offsite. So you've got to have multiple backup copies. Test the restores regularly. Physical media may deteriorate, so whatever, it might work once, but if you're looking for it 3 months later, whatever, you can find that the physical media may not work the second time. And this is one of the reasons we'll point you towards the likes of Azure Backup, where you're backing straight up into Azure and not relying on physical media. So some of the features here for Azure Backup. So you can back up direct to Azure storage. So when you're talking about your on-site there system, whether that be Dynamics, CRM, GP, or if you're i365 customer, you can back straight up to Azure from your on-premise. You can also do that even directly from within SQL. So if you have SQL jobs configured on your, say, Dynamics GP server, while historically or typically a customer might send that back up to a local disk for recovery, you can also, as part of that same job, back it up to Azure so you have an offsite copy. So as I mentioned there, a local backup and an offline copy. It's easily configurable for long-term backup retention. Just for example, you might decide you have a daily backup that you keep for 14 days, monthly keep for 12 months, and a yearly for 7 years if you need that for compliancy. You also have the ability to replicate the backup to other regions if you require that. Compression available to help reduce costs and bandwidth requirements, and those backups are encrypted for security purposes. So just some of the benefits of Azure Backup. It meets compliance requirement for offsite backups. You've no hardware costs, so that being, a physical backup server, tape units, media, etc. So you don't have a requirement for any of that. You've no physical transportation of tapes. I would have had plenty of experience of that on a Friday, or actually it was every day, with bringing tapes off site to a secure location, doing that at the end of the day, bringing other ones back. There's quite a lot of effort involved in that, which all goes away. While those backups are in Azure, you can also recover them to an on-premise server, or if you wanted, you could spin up machines in Azure to restore the data to those if needed be. The backups that are instantly available, as regards it's always there online. You don't have that where you have to go to get the tapes, etc., as you would have had to with when you're physically transporting tapes. All you just need is internet connectivity, so they're instantly available for you to do a restore. So disaster recovery, in addition to protecting your data, you also need to make sure you can recover your applications in the event of a disaster. So Azure Site Recovery is a service that allows for the setup and test of your disaster recovery solution. So before I get into the specifics of Azure Site Recovery, every organization should be doing this regardless of solution deployed. So it's critical to have a plan and to be testing it at least annually and refine the plan based on test results. So you'll find that times you run the test and certain things may not work as you expected, and therefore you can update that plan to take account of that. So let's look at some scenarios supported for Azure Site Recovery. So you can replicate Azure VMs, virtual machines, from one region to another. So even if you're in Azure today, if you had some sort of requirement that you needed to replicate your systems and prove you could fail over in a different region, wherever that might be, if you've your systems in the UK, in Azure UK data center, you might want to replicate them over to the US or something, depends on compliancy requirements. So you can replicate on-premise virtual machines, whether they be VMware or Hyper-V, and you can also do physical servers, Windows and Linux. So pretty much everything that a customer would require. Just some of the features of Azure Site Recovery. It's automated protection and replication of servers. So, that's going to be continuous replication of your applications and data. So you can do partial or full site recovery. So you may decide, okay, I'll only want to do my critical applications. It's a warm standby, so it's not live, and there's not you don't have to reinstall applications such like you might have to do in whatever cold recovery. So it's ready there, although it's not live, to be failed over in the event of a disaster. There's a couple of options. So you can set up Azure Site Recovery to restore to on-premise servers or Azure itself. So for the first option, on-premise, it could be a case that you have a second site where you've got some hardware there already and it's underutilized, and you'd like to be able to piggyback on Azure Site Recovery to recover your systems from one office to another, where you already have some spare hardware. But typically the main use would be where somebody's looking to use Azure Site Recovery to replicate and fail over the systems from one site into Azure as opposed to a second site. There's annual recovery plan testing, so you can be there and you can fail over these systems. You could actually do it more than annual, but one of the services we have, the sort of default is an annual recovery plan test. And these systems can be brought up in a bubble in parallel without affecting your live systems. And you can test access to those systems, ensure the data looks okay, and get it signed off then that you have done your recovery plan test. And that's a huge tick box for customers, you know, particularly those who get audited for things like this. So let's just talk about some m-hance services. So I'll talk about those in relation to a number of these things, you know, because often customers don't maybe have those particular skills in-house to manage these things. So when we talk about Azure Hosting, yeah, we can deploy any of our applications to customers who have Azure environments, but also we can provide these for you. So we can provide a dedicated virtual environment or a multi-tenant for GP and CRM. We can fully manage that for you from OS, SQL, you know, your Dynamics apps with SLA. We can look after the backups and monitoring for you. And we can provide high availability and DR options there also for those depending on your requirements. So in relation to Azure Backup, while yes, we can provide you with the Azure Backup service, we can configure that for you, but we can also manage it on behalf of you if you like. So what would we typically do? We'd monitor the backup alerts in the recovery services vault. We'll configure notification backup alerts for you. We can take remedial action based on those alerts, perform your live data restores, and typically we would do a quarterly test restore and validation of that. In relation to Azure Site Recovery, we can manage that also for you after setting it up. So we'd monitor the replications service and resolve any issues that come to light, monitor the status of the replicated items, do root cause analysis of the service to identify underlying problems, and maintaining the failover runbook and annual DR failover tests, which are probably the most important parts of that. So that failover runbook is, okay, what are the steps required in the event of a failover? When does it happen? And then just the steps to follow when it is called. And then you want to have that annual DR failover test as well, probably for compliancy requirements. So really that's it. Yeah, I think that's it all covered. Over to you, Jenny, maybe now.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. So that concludes today's session. I would like to thank you all for joining us. Please do keep a lookout in your inboxes over the next couple of days where we will send you a link to today's recording. Once the webinar has closed, a short survey will pop up. We'd really appreciate it if you could take a few moments to complete it. Once again, thank you for joining us and have a great day.
Thank you.